For those of you who want to understand what's going on in education and general principles, Twitter and Google Plus is a great place. You can literally follow a handful of people, 10, 12 people, and understand kind of big concepts. They'll publish papers, they'll push different conferences that are going on, videos, lots of really cool stuff about learning and education in general out there. I post a lot of things, I share a lot of things that we're doing at Google. So for those of you who might not be big Twitter users or big Google Plus users, there's a whole education community out there that's doing some amazing things with that. So I just wanted to share some contact information. Now, to get started, like I said, I'm from New York, and I'm going to give you my perspective. I've been at Google for 8 years. I just celebrated my 8-year anniversary, and I keep wanting to leave, but I can't. Because every couple of months we do something amazing and I just want to be part of it. And so it's been 8 years, but I originally started in New York. And my perspective on education comes from me growing up in New York. Like I said, I've been at Google for 8 years. I launched Google Apps for Education when we launched it with Arizona State University 6 years ago. Then we launched Google Apps into K-12. Then we launched Chromebooks and Google Play, and I've been part of that whole thing for the last 8 years and what we've been doing in this space. But my perspective on what's going on is that I have this unbelievable disrespect for impossible. And in education, we talk a lot about what's possible and what's impossible. I have a disrespect for what's impossible, and it comes from just my upbringing. I am a first-generation American who grew up in Hell's Kitchen, not the Hell's Kitchen that you guys go visit now with all the nice restaurants. The one, remember the one from the 70s and 80s where you never went to go visit? That Hell's Kitchen. My mother came from Argentina, single, so I grew up with a single mom on welfare in New York and did not enjoy it very much. Was not an enjoyable environment. And I wanted out. I didn't want to be part of that. And I saw either the NBA as a way out or education. And the truth is, when you look at the odds and when you look at the statistics, I don't know which one was the better option. Because at the time, in the 80s, there was probably a 45% dropout rate for kids growing up in a place like Hell's Kitchen in New York. But I did that. Then I decided that I wanted to go to college. And at the time, there was about a 5% graduation rate from college for kids like me who were growing up in Hell's Kitchen, and I did that. And then I went and got my master's degree, and there was probably like a 2% chance of me being able to do that, and I did that. And then even if you go look on LinkedIn, how many people from SUNY Brockport work at Google? 1. So impossible doesn't really stop me very much. So I didn't have high expectations of myself. I had unrealistic expectations. And these are the same expectations that I have for education. Because I believe that it is absolutely the most powerful thing you can do for someone is a great education. Now, not only does it benefit the individual as it benefited me, it benefits generations after that. So now I have 2 kids, and another one on the way. I like having one every 10 years. And I have a 12-year-old and a 21-year-old. And by the way, for those of you who don't have a 21-year-old, and they're younger, nothing prepares you for that bizarre moment at a restaurant when your little baby daughter asks the waiter what kind of tequila they have. Or just like this past weekend when she says, "Hey, when are we going out drinking?" It just doesn't, there's something weird about that. Because you think, weren't you just ordering a Happy Meal like 2 years ago? So my daughter's 21, she's in her almost 4th year of college, and I never told her she had to go to college. I never demanded that she have to go to college. She just expected that she was going to college because I went to college. She just assumed she was going to college because her mother went to college. She just assumed that she's going to go to graduate school because I went to graduate school. She assumes I'm paying for it, but I still have time to bust that bubble. The idea, though, is that these 2 kids and their expectations of what's possible in life are dramatically different than what my expectations were. And that's the power that education has, is that it can create these expectations that weren't around. So I know they're going to be okay, and I know their kids are going to be okay, and so we were able to kind of cut the cycle of poverty, because education disrupted it, and now it's a completely different course. So that's the power that education has. Now, even if we're not talking about low-income students, and we're not talking about the power that education can have on a generation of kids that are growing up in poverty and those types of things, we are looking at a different economy than we were when I was in school going through the process, or that you were in school going through this process. In 1978, roughly 28% of the jobs required some kind of college experience. By the time we get to 2020, more than 60% of the jobs are going to require some kind of college experience. And I say college experience because I don't know what that's going to look like in the future. I don't know what that learning is going to look like yet. But what we're really saying is this post-secondary education, this high school graduation isn't enough thing, right? Even the mid-wage, mid-skill group, those skills are also different and growing as well. So whether you're a technician, whether you are working in any field at all, some kind of post-secondary education is going to be required with this new economy. And this new economy demands that we step up what we're doing in this space. Now, I'm standing in front of you, graduating from a school in New York, prepared for life, and now I'm working in a job that didn't exist when I graduated high school. It's still a little bizarre to think that I pay my mortgage with this thing called the internet, and that this job didn't exist when I graduated high school. And so we have to think about the fact that this generation of kids, your kids that are in school, we have to prepare them to solve problems that haven't been identified using technology and advancements that haven't been discovered in roles and jobs that don't exist. So take it easy on your teachers, because that's a hard thing to do. Right? And so what do we have to focus on? That's what I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. But that's what we're faced with, is preparing a generation of kids for jobs that don't necessarily exist yet. And how do we do that? Now, the good news is that for most of history, it was predetermined for you. Right? Where you were born, who you were born to, what location you were born around, and the resources that you had at your disposal determined your academic success. And this has literally changed in our lifetime. We had, in my community, in Hell's Kitchen, we had the Columbus Library on 51st Street and 10th Avenue. This is what we had as a resource center, for not just my school at PS 111, but for every school in Hell's Kitchen. The nearest library to this was the 42nd Street Library. So this was our library, my school's library, every person that lived in the community, everyone's library. That closed at 5 o'clock every day. So when you get out of basketball practice at 4:45, it makes it kind of hard to go look for stuff. Or that was closed on Sundays and open maybe for 4 hours on Saturday. And you would go find books and they weren't there, or the resources were old. It was not the mecca center of information. But that's what we had. That's what we had to deal with. And in our lifetime, we have 1 million Columbus libraries at our fingertips. And nobody's freaking out about this. I mean, this revolutionary thing happened, and everyone's like, eh. We have the world's information at our fingertips. Everything is at our fingertips. 1 million Columbus libraries at our fingertips. And for some reason, my 12-year-old 7th grade classroom looks basically the same as my classroom did. And it makes me wonder why. Especially considering that the policies are still basically the same, at least in my kids' school. Where when I was in 7th grade, I wasn't allowed to wear my Casio calculator watch. Do you remember that? Who still has one of those? I wish I had mine. But I wasn't allowed to wear my Casio calculator watch, and my 12-year-old's not allowed to use his iPhone. Same policy, different technology. But yet, the world's information is at our fingertips. How do we take advantage of that? How do we make sure that we go along with this revolution that's happening? Now, I know what you guys are saying and thinking, that we've been talking about technology and education for a really long time. You know, first it was motion pictures, were going to revolutionize education. Then it was television and Sesame Street, and we've been talking about computers in education since at least the 60s. All of these were going to be the new revolution in education that was going to transform education. The newest thing since the printing press, which of course produced the worksheets. But that's what we face. We've been talking about technology in education for a really long time. So what's different this time? And I'm going to propose 3 arguments, 3 things that I want you to think about. Number 1 is all the information, all the research that we have in learning space that we know today that's different than when we were in school. We know, for example, that kids learn content at different paces. We know that kids learn things that they're interested in. We know all this stuff. All your teachers know all this information about how kids are learning in different ways. Not that there's anything that says that I have to be a visual learner or you have to be a text learner, not that. It's more about you take 2 kids, you give them a subject, and they know things in different ways. They might be interested in one thing versus another thing. But we know all this personal stuff happens in our brains on how we learn, and yet, again, my 12-year-old 7th grade classroom, all those kids are learning the same stuff in the same way at the exact same time, and they're expected to know everything at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. Technology can help us individualize learning. It can help us personalize learning. It can help us make education and the learning relevant and engaging. When we look at dropout data, what you find, besides the social things that are happening in our communities, one of the reasons why is because kids don't find the education relevant or engaging. They don't feel like they're part of it. Technology can help students be part of the learning process. So that's 1. Number 2 is the way technology has embedded into the core of our lives, like in no other time before. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have not used technology today? How many of you have not been on the web today? Is there a court order or something? Jerry, you weren't on your phone today? You weren't on your phone in the waiting room? I don't believe it. Somebody check his browser history. It has wrapped itself up to the point where we don't even think about it anymore as adults. And how long did that take us? A couple of years? I mean, do you remember we used to have to call the internet? With our home phones? And the internet was busy? Think about that. The internet was busy. Hi, you've reached the internet. I can't talk to you right now. But if you leave it, don't leave me a message because I'm not going to call you back. The internet was busy, and it would make you keep calling back. And eventually you would get on, and you'd be so excited that you were on. And what was your big reward? It was a bunch of web pages that had words with links to web pages that had words. And every once in a while, somebody would post a picture, and you'd lose your mind. Like, oh, a picture's coming. I got to wait 20 minutes. And today, what's our level of expectation? We lose our minds. Teachers are the nicest people in the world, and I watch them turn into mobs at conferences if the technology or the internet's slow. Or like I can't use I try to use the internet on airplanes, and I get so frustrated. How can I get frustrated? I am traveling at 35,000 feet at 500 miles an hour, and I'm frustrated that the internet's too slow. It's ridiculous, right? So that's the level of expectations that we have with technology and the web. It's been wrapped around the core of our lives. Do you remember we used to have to go to work to use technology? Try to explain to a 10-year-old what Cyber Monday is. Why do we call it Cyber Monday? We call it Cyber Monday because the Monday after Thanksgiving, we used to go to work to go shopping. How many of you use your personal devices for work-related things? Right. All of you do. Most of you do. Right? We used to go to work to use technology. We used to go to work to use the internet. We used to go to work to use applications. And now we're frustrated by those same things because the technology we have in our own pocket is better than what we get at work. The applications that we use in our personal lives are better than the applications at work, and so forth. And sometimes the internet access. So I work at Google, and my connectivity at home is better sometimes than it is in the office. Right? That flip happened, and nobody paid attention to it. So technology's wrapped itself around our core lives. Imagine what it's like for our kids, which is this web generation. This generation of kids who don't know any better, who don't know that the world existed before Google or technology, and for the younger ones, before Wi-Fi, right? They don't know any better. Now it's important to point out here, and I'll caution you to be wary of anyone, teachers, presenters, anyone who'll tell you that this generation of kids are different than we are. They're not different than we are. They're exactly the same. Evolution hasn't happened in some kind of, evolution didn't take speed and become some kind of crazy thing where our kids are different than we are. Their brains are not wired differently. They're exactly like we are. They can't multitask. We have to teach them how to concentrate. We have to teach them how to pay attention to something. But how they learn how to do things is different. Their expectations of how to learn are different than they were for us. This is a picture of my 12-year-old, and you can see the Christmas tree there in the corner, so this is just a couple months ago. He was frustrated with a game that he loves called Minecraft. I know, there's going to be Minecraft rehab centers all over the country. It's a great game for those of you who are like questioning, what it does to you. It's an unbelievable game. As long, again, moderation and limited and all those things. But he's frustrated with his Minecraft world. He's a big player in it because the mods that he have can't do what he wants them to do. So what does he do? He learns how to code in JavaScript so that he can create his own mods. I didn't tell him to learn how to code in JavaScript. If anything, I want him to learn Python. But he learned how to code, so he's teaching himself through Khan Academy how to code in JavaScript so that he can create his own mods. And he's showing us this. And what was interesting about this is that my wife asked him, who are you, are you doing this alone? And his response was like, no, I'm not doing it alone. I'm doing it with the people in the video that are teaching me. He doesn't even know he's doing self-paced learning. He's just doing it. And a couple weeks later, he wants me to QA his code to make sure it works because he created a bunch of code so that he can use it in Minecraft. My daughter, who's scared to fly, a couple years ago, we go every year. We go on a 2-week vacation with the kids. The picture that you saw earlier was of us in Peru last year. The year before was Hawaii. I mean, for a kid who grew up in Hell's Kitchen, thinking that everything on the other side of the George Washington Bridge, it's my favorite time of year. But we go on vacation. She's scared to fly, so like any good parent, I bribed her. And she's a musician, so I told her we'd buy her a ukulele when we got to Hawaii. And we'll go into the store, we buy the ukulele, we're walking out of the store, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye, videos and instruction books. And I say, hey, do you want to pick up a video or instruction book to learn how to play a ukulele? And she looked at me like I was, the guy in the sandals with the black socks up to here, and the shirt tucked into my short. I'm supposed to be a hip, cool guy that works at Google. And she's like, what's wrong with you? Why? How is she going to learn how to play ukulele? YouTube. Right. She's going to find 10 people that are going to teach her how to play the song that she's interested in, and she's going to somehow connect with one of them, and that's going to work for her. And now she plays the ukulele because that's how she learned how to play. They're not different than we are, but how they learn and their expectations of how they learn are different than they are for us. This is the generation of kids that are coming into our schools. So I was wondering, are we letting them reach their full potential? Are we getting in their way? Even in the best circumstances, even with the best schools, with the best curriculum, is that limiting them? And I was looking around and doing some research, and I found some interesting things, like answers that students put on things that I'm sure you've seen, right? I think as a kid, to get a girlfriend, kiss her, and rule the world is a great plan. right? Or, I think that love is the strongest force on earth. Or, that we're limiting their potential because maybe we're not asking them the right questions in the right way. And I'm exaggerating, obviously, but my point is that their expectations are different than they are for us, and how they process things are different than they are for us. And so this is a generation of kids who are used to using technology, who don't know that the world existed before Google, who are used to being able to pick up any device. And I remember my 12-year-old for years, wherever we go, is there going to be Wi-Fi? Like, that was his question. The way we used to ask, is there going to be TVs? And we have to accept that, because that's the world that we live in. So they have a different set of expectations. Now, speaking of students, I try to talk to students whenever I get a chance. And so far this year, I've done it 3 times, and I got a couple other things planned. And love to come back someday and talk to your students if you guys want me to do that. But especially kids who are growing up the way I grew up, because it's important for them, and it's important for me, for them to see someone who's growing up the way I grew up, that if I can do this, they can do this too. And it's also important to talk to them because, especially that group of kids, because a lot of the times we go to kids and we say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want you to stop asking kids that question. Because we already stated earlier that we don't know if the job that they want to be even exists yet. So I don't ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. Again, kids that are growing up in poverty might not even understand what an electrical engineer is or what a bioscientist is. Instead, what I ask them is, what problem do you want to solve? What problem are you interested in? What spins in your head? And if you learn how to solve problems, you can learn how to do anything. And then I challenge them, and I say to them, what do you think you need to solve that problem? What knowledge, what skills, what abilities do you need? Who can you follow on Facebook and Twitter and all these other places? What books can you read? What videos can you watch? What classes can you take online? And that's when the technology starts opening up for you, right? Because all of a sudden now you can kind of create your own world in terms of building the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to try to solve that problem. I don't even like the word student, to be honest with you. Because I'll admit, I remember when I graduated from graduate school, I said, the last day, it's very vivid. I remember saying, I'm done learning. I never have to learn again. And the truth is, that's not true, right? There's no difference between my 12-year-old and me. We're always learning. We're constantly learning. And we have to figure out how do we develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities to get there. And I tell these kids that they have an advantage over me when I was growing up, because I didn't have access to 1 million Columbus libraries. And they can take classes online from MIT. They can learn, they can read any research paper in the world. They can do anything. The limits are endless in terms of what's possible to build the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to become problem solvers. I also talked to them about the idea of iteration. How many of you use Google today? How many of you used it last night? Okay. How many of you realize that the Google you use today is different than the Google you used last night? We update Google about 600 times a year. So you get about 600 different versions of Google every year. And we're not the only ones. But the point is that we're continuously iterating. I don't like that we try it in school. Sometimes we say we need to teach our kids how to fail. I don't like that word. It's a very black and white word. You either fail or you succeed, and that's not true anymore, right? I mean, it works in sports, but everywhere else, you're always constantly iterating. I like the word iteration, because even if you're good at something or either you're successful, you have to keep iterating, and that's the world that we currently live in. Otherwise, there'd only be one iPad and not 12, or 1 new phone and not 40 new phones. We're constantly iterating. That's the world that we live in. We have to teach our kids how to iterate. We got to teach our kids how to look at something, learn something, and then continuously iterate so that they're making something better. They're continuously learning. So I like to talk to them about the idea of iterating. I also like to talk to them about collaboration. If you think about what's going on in education, and all of us went through this process, it is a very single individual sport, but we live in a team-based world, right? You take the class, you get a grade, you graduate, and then we push everyone out the door and we say, okay, good luck, go work with others. And in the world, we all work on teams. We all are part of a collaboration effort. And we need to kind of incorporate that into our environments, educational environments. Imagine as a teacher, you hand out tests to 7th graders, 8th graders, whatever grade you want, and at the end of the test, 2 kids come up to you holding the test together, saying, we did this together. What do you think the reaction would be?
Cheaters.
Right, when did collaboration become cheating? And imagine this in your world. Imagine me going up to Larry Page and saying, here's the education strategy, I did it all by myself. Nobody helped me. What about the other stakeholders and other people that are part of that? No, I didn't ask them for help. I did it all by myself. Aren't you proud? Collaboration has to be part of that. And collaboration is more than just working together. Collaboration is the understanding that your stuff is only going to get better when you're working with others. Collaboration is the ability to actually actively listen and ask good questions. Collaboration is the ability to change your mind based on good data or someone's argument. These are the skills that we can build, and technology can help us with this whole idea of how to collaborate, because it's not just collaboration with the person sitting next to you sometimes, it's sometimes collaborating with people all over the world. And so learning how to collaborate in real time, in virtual time, in different ways, on teams, not on teams, all these different things is absolutely a critical skill that kids are going to need. And then I talk to them about becoming digital leaders. And what I mean by that is that I'm beyond digital citizenship. Digital citizenship is the minimum requirement for the new economy. The internet's not a fad, digital technology is not a fad, it's here to stay. They have to become leaders in this space. They have to watch videos and create videos, post blogs, read blogs. They have to be able to collaborate with their classmates and collaborate with experts from all over the world. They have to be able to become digital leaders and have a grip on their digital footprint. Not only so they can learn basic digital citizen skills of privacy and security and making sure they're not posting bad things and making sure they're not going to bad websites. And you have to do that. I always like to relate it to my kids and how I taught my kids how to cross the street, because I wasn't going to be able to ban the cars, right? Eventually they're going to be out in the street. We have to teach them how to that. We have to teach them how to cross that digital street. We need to teach them how to survive, how to thrive in that digital world, and how to have control over that. So to me, I talk to them about becoming those leaders, that they're responsible for what they do and what they do in the digital space. And I get the argument all the time about how technology makes us antisocial, and I love this picture. Because I remember these days where we all were wrapped in our newspapers. I'm not worried about us being social creatures. As a matter of fact, if you think about anything, I always like to say I grew up in a small town in New York. Hell's Kitchen was a small town when I grew up. Just like I'm sure you have a small town feeling wherever you live, because everyone knows everyone's business. The internet just made the whole world one big giant small town. And that's why we need to make sure that they're building good digital citizenship skills and good digital leadership skills. But the idea that technology makes us antisocial is saying the same thing that, oh great, now everyone has access to newspapers. Nobody's going to talk to each other ever again. Right? It's the same concept. It's an argument that we've been having for a long time. Now, when I talk to teachers, I tell them that technology gives them the ability to free them from being the Google in the room. They no longer have to be the Google in the room. And what I mean by that is that at some point in history, it made sense that we all had to have a baseline of knowledge so that we can talk to each other. Because when you ask me what happened, December 7th, 1941, for example, I would have to say, hang on, I'll be back in 2 days, I'm going to go find out. And either I had to find someone and ask them and rely on their credibility, or I'd have to go find the information myself. And that is no longer true because all the world's information is at our fingertips. So it changes a little bit what it is that we want our kids to know how to do. Not just know the information, but actually make sense of that information. And so one of my favorite things as being a parent is when my kid asks me a question, and I know they can look up the question, look up the answer, my response is always, listen, I work for a search engine, I'm not actually the search engine. Go look it up. And then it's my responsibility to follow up. What did you learn? What does it mean? How do you make sense of it? Did you vet it? Is it credible? How do you apply it? So it's our responsibility to not give credit to kids for something that they can just look up, but instead help them develop deep understanding of things. Give them the passion to really appreciate understanding something deeply. And that's the difference between what was going on before. Because if you think about the education space, that's what we really want our kids to be able to do, is be able to understand something deeply, to be able to become problem solvers, to be able to become critical thinkers, and that's what we need to be able to focus on. And this isn't just something that's happening in the US, and that's something that a lot of folks don't realize, is this is a concept that's going on everywhere. As I mentioned earlier, we were in Peru this summer, and we were in Machu Picchu village, and we're having dinner in the pueblo, and we noticed a rally going on. We go outside, and there's some political rally for a mayor or something going on, and this is what we saw. These group of people protesting, or actually just kind of having a rally, but wearing this shirt. And that shirt, if you can't read it, says, "The great change can only come through education." And this is a pueblo in the middle of Peru that's only accessible by either train or hiking. And they get it. They see the potential of what's possible with education. And from a digital perspective, this is happening everywhere. There are 2 billion people online. There are 5 billion that aren't online. What's the consequence of those 5 billion getting online? That's the competition. That's what we're dealing with. And this is a concept that's happening everywhere. It's this whole idea of how do we utilize technology? How do we change what learning models look like so that we can all get the information, the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that we need. Now, it's important to realize that there is no magic bullet, right? There is nothing that solves education. This whole idea of iterating education is important, that we always have to give, we always have to make it better, but there isn't some magic solution that's going to solve all our problems if we think we even have problems. And so how do we do that? How do we make sure that we're focused on the right things? Well, first is this whole idea of being able to try different things, new learning models, and they're happening everywhere. And I'm not all familiar with what you guys are doing here, but there's blended learning, there's flipped classrooms, there's hybrid models, there's project-based learning, inquiry-based learning. There's all these cool things that are happening that's making education more relevant, more engaging. And we've got to give teachers some space to try this stuff, to experiment, to iterate, to get good at it. This generation of teachers is the generation of teachers that are going to create the learning models for the future. And we got to give them some space. We got to let them play. And I don't mean an experiment here like, oh, let's try this and see what happens. It's not that. It's making sure that if they have research-based ideas on how to flip a classroom or how to make education more relevant and engaging, and how to use technology to support and enable that, then we have to let them be able to do that, because these new learning models is what's really important in what we're doing in this space. And speaking of teachers, we have to keep in mind, always remember that at the end of the day, there's nothing more important than a teacher in the classroom for that kid. Especially kids who grew up or are growing up the way I grew up. And so those teachers need the knowledge, the skills, and abilities to help their students thrive. And so they need the professional development. They need the feedback. They need the collaboration and support from parents and other teachers, not just teachers in their own community, but teachers all over the world. And they need to learn they need to be able to collaborate with one another. But being able to give them that space so that they can actually figure this stuff out is absolutely critical. And then we need to make sure that we're investing in the future. We all walked in here and expected the electricity to work, right? Right? We don't walk in here and like, oh, look, the electricity works, thank God. We just expect it to work. I always like to say that broadband technology is the new electricity. It's just part of the infrastructure now. You would never build a new school and say, no, we're only going to put electricity on the first and second floors. We're not going to put electricity on the third and fourth floor. Or, if you had a choice, you ask kids, what would you rather have, electricity or broadband? What do you think they'll pick? And just in the classroom, we would never set up a classroom with 20 desks and say, oh, you can only put 20 desks in here. 10 kids are going to have to learn how to stand. That's unacceptable. And so technology has gotten to the point where it's unacceptable not to have it because it's part of it. Now, I'm not saying that every kid has to always be using their computers. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's just like anything else. It's part of the infrastructure. It's part of what we need in the education space. Now, in terms of innovation in education, this, I'll share this with you. This is actually a picture of the original Google.com. Right? This is how it started. And it went from this to, now it looks like this. And it only happens to continuously because of continuously iterating. It wasn't like this was what Google looked like and then they waited to build this. It got there through iteration. And that's what I see happening today in education, is that iteration is happening. And blended learning is different than it was 3 years ago. And flipped classrooms are different than they were 3 years ago. And MOOCs are different than they were 3 years ago. And that continuous improvement, that continuous iteration in education is what's absolutely critical. And in education, what we have to make sure, and this is where you can hold schools accountable, is to make sure that we're not just using technology to replace current systems. Right? What my biggest fear is that we end up using technology to automate and make bad education faster. We don't want that. We don't want that in our personal lives, we don't want that in our work lives, we don't want that in our education. How do we use technology to innovate in learning? How do we use it as a baseline to help us improve? Because technology is not the silver bullet. Great education is a silver bullet. Technology is there to enable and support what learning looks like. It's an enabling capability that helps us do that. It is not there to solve our problems. And so it's important to realize that it's just a tool like everything else. And so when you hear or talk to folks who tell you, show me how technology improves learning, my response is always, well, show me how desks improve learning. Or show me how textbooks improve learning. Those are all tools in the system, and how we take advantage of those and how we utilize those is more important than whether or not we're using them in the first place. And so that's the important thing to focus on. And it's also important to realize that we're literally just getting started in this. And I don't mean Google, I mean all of us. Teachers today are creating what these new learning models are going to look like. The technology is just getting started. The web is part of our lives to the point where we don't even realize that it's become part of our infrastructure and what we're doing in this space. But we're literally getting started. And I want to leave you with this slide. I'd love to answer some questions. If you guys have questions, I can take some. I think we have some time for those, right? But I want you to think about this. I want you to think about a 5-year-old. How many of you have a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old going into school next in the fall? Okay. I want you to think about the fact think about that 5-year-old and think about the technology that you use the most, whether it's a tablet or your phone or your laptop or whatever it is that you have. And I want you to think about that 5-year-old, and I want you to realize that technology that you're looking at is the worst technology that 5-year-old will ever see in their lives. It's their Commodore 64. They're going to find that device that you have in your pocket right now in a thrift store in 20 years, in the 50-cent box, and they're going, oh, my dad or my mom used to have this. And they're going to take it home and hang it up on a wall like a museum piece. And they're going to laugh at the fact that you used to have to charge this thing every day. We are just getting started in this space, and that's exciting. Thank you. Questions? I'd love to answer any questions that you guys have. And I'm sorry, and I should mention that I travel around the world and I travel around the country and I visit lots of schools, and I don't go just visit any schools. And Joel and his team and everyone here is doing an amazing job thinking about what the future is. And I want to give it up to his team. Because I use examples of what you guys are doing in the school system as examples in my presentations all the time, right? And that's where you need to be, is a couple of steps ahead. And Joel and his team and everyone here thinks about those things, about what that future looks like. And there's a comfort in that, knowing that somebody's thinking about that. Trust me, my 12-year-old last year asked me if he could drop out and just travel with me. And I actually thought about it for a while. Because we don't have that same infrastructure in my own school system where my kid goes to school. So I just want to make sure I highlight that for Joel and his team. Questions that you guys might have? Yeah.
How do you balance learning and technology with the distractions that are available right on the same device for a child?
How do we struggle with that, right? Like, we do as well. I mean, I struggle with it all the time. Actually, I had a conversation yesterday about this idea that I have about how I want to permanently leave my out of office message on, and just says, I check email between this time, and that's it. And if you need me after that, text me or something. Like, I'm trying to come up with that strategy, and I think that's an important question to ask. There's a lot of stuff going on in the whole space around mindfulness, right? And some really good studies that are out there that show you that teachers are working with students on like how to take a deep breath, how to relax, how to think, how to process. Those are absolutely critical skills that kids need to develop. And so part of it is, and it's like anything, right? Moderation, right? You can't let your kids sit in this room and play Minecraft for 4 days. You just can't, as much as they want to do that, that's not the answer. But then again, it's hard as a parent to walk in and to your kid who's playing Minecraft and he's building things and he's learning and he's collaborating and he's problem solving, he's doing all these things, and you're supposed to go in there and go outside and play with the stick. Right? So I get it. I got 2 kids, and it's hard to figure out that right balance. So part of it is moderation and understanding kind of where limits are, and part of it is learning. We have to teach our kids how to concentrate, how to focus. And it's okay to tell your kid, all right, you're doing your homework, shut everything off. No TV, no radio, no headphones, none of that. I mean, whatever you think is right, do it, right? Because we have to teach our kids how to do that. They're not going to learn. It's not an intuitive way to do things. We have to teach them how to do things. We are animals. We like. I just saw a flashlight. I lost my concentration on certainty because I saw a flash. We like shiny things, right? And so we have to learn how to focus. All of us do, not just our kids, but all of us. Yeah.
Where do you think the future of university education is given that MOOCs and other education?
I'll repeat the question. Yeah. So the question is, what do I think about MOOCs and the future of higher education and what that looks like? University education. Expensive university. I went to SUNY Brockport. I paid off my school in like 2 weeks. I think that's a great question, and I think it's the idea that learning isn't like, oh, here's my degree, now hire me because I'm perfect. It doesn't work that way anymore. I think what you're seeing, there's a great article by Tom Friedman called How to Get a Job at Google, or I forget what it's called, but literally this past weekend, working at Google, I forget what it's called. What was it? How to Get a Job at Google, right? And apparently it's harder to get a job at Google than it is to get into Harvard. I like to say that it's harder to get an email back from Tom, who I've been trying to email for a while, than it is to get a job at Google, but that's my personal problem. The idea of higher education, to me, is really about higher learning, right? How do you get to higher learning? And that's going to be a continuous process. Now, what happens when companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft, and not even us, but Chevron, Exxon, and anyone else, when we start being able to do our own assessments of what your knowledge, skills, and abilities are, and then it doesn't matter where you went to college, or it doesn't matter, what expensive university you went to, because you can show me that you have knowledge, skills, and abilities, and not a piece of paper. And I think that's kind of where the future is going, where where we need to focus on what problem, if we have our kids focus on what problem they're interested in, then they can focus on what knowledge, skills, and abilities they need to do to master and focus that problem. And eventually, if I want to do an assessment against that, then it shouldn't matter where you went to school. So MOOCs are here to stay. They'll be changing, but the idea of higher learning will always be different. And it's not just some kid sitting in front of a computer screen, staring at it, and listening to a lecture. There's a social element to it. There's collaboration. At Google, we like to, if you ever get a chance to visit a Google office, a typical workspace where you find like 4 people in the cube area, we stick like 8 people in that space. Because we want them to, like, smell each other's armpits. We want, we want them to, like, get to know each other really well, because that's really where the work happens, where the collaboration happens. And so, how do you take elements of learning something and social aspects of learning with each other and put something like that together? I see the future of learning being more about collaborative learning, right? I was talking to a school, basis school in Phoenix, and they're trying to do coding for students, but they're not even going to hire a professor. They're just going to have a morning program between 7 and 8 for kids who are interested in coding. They're going to just teach each other how to code, right? So things like that are happening in that space as well. Yeah? Hi. Textbooks in school, what the future of textbooks in school. I say the future of, I like to look at that as the future of content, right? Content's important, and content is, you have every right to charge someone for content. If you think about iTunes, for example, remember before iTunes, when we used to buy albums, whoever we liked, they were able to put like 2 good songs on an album of 10 crappy songs, and like let 10 great songs last for 5 years because they could do that. And now they can't do that anymore. And look at what happened with music. I think music's better today than it's been forever, right? I'm a big music fan. I listen to lots of different types of music, and I think music today is better than it ever was because of that freedom of, like, now you have to pick and choose. My 12-year-old has never bought an album and doesn't understand that concept. He picks and chooses the music and the content that they're interested in. Some of it is free, some of it is paid, so I can see that being more piecemeal. The content is valuable. I mean, I pay for my New York Times subscription because it's good content, right? And so I think and there's also a lot of free stuff out there. So there's a lot of different models that we're starting to see, and the publishers are starting to bend that way, right? There's a project going on with HMH and Chromebooks, for example, where they're going to be putting content out there for Chromebooks. I know Pearson's doing a lot of that piecemeal through open class. And so I see it as being almost like an iTunes model where you're picking and choosing songs. You don't have to buy a whole textbook for one good chapter. Just like you don't have to buy a whole bad album for one good song. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I'm the wrong person to ask that because I can't spell anything. And if it wasn't for spell check, I don't know if I'd be standing here talking to you, right? So for me, that's not where my strong suit. I speak 2 languages, and I think part of it is like I can't understand why you guys created a language that doesn't sound like it's spelled. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Don't get me started on that. So I think that, yeah, absolutely, you have to learn basics. My son, great speller. Never, just a great speller. My daughter, not so much. Some of it is just the way they're built, right? Now my daughter will spend 14 hours editing 80 seconds of a video, where my son will lose complete consciousness if he ever had to do that, right? So I think it's, what are those basic things that kids need to know? Absolutely, there's enough learning science information out there to show you what are the basic things that kids need to know. And spelling and learning how to spell is one of those. Now, that doesn't mean that the technology can't help enable and support that process. And I've chosen not to pay attention to how to spell the word received. I'm just going to always let spell check do it. But technology helped me get here, and if I didn't have my phone, there's no way I'd find this place, right? So, so there's that balance that we have to figure out. Again, it's not moderation, and what is basic is going to be different for different students and what they're interested in, right? And if you find the passion and the problems that you want to solve and are interested in, most kids will spend the time and the energy to focus on that. So I think that, technology, we used to say the same thing about calculators when calculators were first introduced. Or when books were first introduced, 100,000 years ago, we used to say the same thing about books were going to make us not be able to write better, right? So there's all these concepts that are out there. I'm not worried about the American creativity spirit when I see other school systems in the world. Our ability, someone in Singapore or South Korea, they could probably spell every word correctly. I'm more excited about the creativity and collaboration aspects of what's American education and the future of that. So sometimes you gotta let technology take care of some things, and sometimes you have to want to learn how to do something, and it doesn't matter whether the technology is there or not. I was just always been a bad speller, and it doesn't matter if the spell check or not. I'm always going to be a bad speller, so I think that's just part of it. Yeah, let's go this way. Yeah.
As the kids learn at different rates,
yeah.
then how do teachers then gauge based on technology that they've achieved a certain rate of learning before they can proceed?
That's a great question. The question is, if kids learn at different paces, how can teachers understand where a kid is before they move on to the next thing? Now, this gets into a conversation around assessments, right? And I'm not actually a fan of assessments, of like the one time, you take a big test. I'm not a fan of that. I've been public about that because I'm a think about Derek Jeter. I can say Derek Jeter here, right? Because sometimes I say Derek Jeter and people throw things at me. But when Derek Jeter comes up to bat, the announcer can say, Derek Jeter bats 222 on Tuesdays when it's 50 degrees or warmer. That's the level of performance data that we have on our baseball players, but for some reason we're okay with our kids just taking a test once a year. Doesn't make any sense. One of the cool things about technology is that a lot of these assessment tools are already built into the tools that we're using. Khan Academy has a self-assessment tool built in. ST Math has assessment built in. Pearson Newton has an assessment built in. So kids can't move on until they master skills because the assessments are built in. So you can almost, I would argue, with the use of technology and some of the programs that are being developed, you can actually have a daily picture of a kid and how they're producing and how they're performing for a specific day, and actually start looking at other factors as to what's contributing to that. So I don't know if you have a young kid, ST Math is one of these great programs that shows you some really cool things. There's other learning math programs out there that are doing some amazing things with assessments. So you can actually self-pace the learning so that you can actually see how a kid is doing almost daily. The challenge to teachers is, how do I take those different programs? How do I take Khan Academy and ST Math and Pearson and all these other things and create that picture? And we gotta give teachers some space and some resources.